Good evening and welcome to MetroFocus. I'm Rafael Pi Roman. You know, like so many other states, New Jersey is feeling the financial crunch of the pandemic and turning to extreme measures to plug the gap. After weeks of negotiations, Governor Phil Murphy and the legislature recently enacted a Millionaires Tax for residents and businesses while also borrowing $4.5 billion to help balance the budget. But will these controversial moves made in a time of unprecedented crisis ultimately backfire on the Garden State, or should other cash-strapped states follow New Jersey's lead? Joining us now with answer to these and other questions is Steve Adubato, the host of One-on-One with Steve Adubato, and of course, a MetroFocus contributor. Steve, welcome back to the program.
Great to be with you, Raph.
So Steve, Governor Murphy signs a $32.7 billion budget, which includes a $4.5 billion of borrowed money. How does a state with the second lowest credit rating in the nation, and which is already paying hundreds of millions of dollars of interest from past loans, pass a budget like this?
Well, first of all, let's make it clear. It's not even for a full year. It's a 9-month budget. There was a 3-month budget that was going to get us through the earlier period of COVID, and this is a 9-month emergency budget. The state Supreme Court approved that unprecedented, extraordinary number of $4.5 billion of borrowing. And let's be clear, that's got to be paid off at some point. The governor argues that these are, as you said in your lead, Raph, unprecedented times, extraordinary times, that New Jersey is cash strapped. The governor has said that the federal government has not come through with enough money for the states, particularly hard-hit states like New Jersey early on, New Jersey and New York, our viewing audience on MetroFocus. The federal government didn't come through, so we had to borrow this money. The problem's going to be, Raph, and by the way, Republicans are up in arms about this, and some others, because it's an unprecedented level of borrowing and has to be paid off. And I don't see the plan as to how to pay it off. But who am I? I'm not sitting in the governor's seat. I don't have to figure out how to balance the budget. You got to remember, the Constitution of New Jersey in 1947 says you have to have a balanced budget. Well, it's not going to be balanced without borrowing. And the governor says this is a once-in-a-lifetime situation, Raph. And I got to tell you, I'm concerned about who's going to pay it off, our kids down the road. It's not going to be pretty, but the governor said it was the only way to fill this hole.
You know, and the reason that the state Supreme Court allowed it to borrow the money, which is, again, according to the Constitution, also according to the Constitution, supposed to get the approval of New Jersey voters before they do. This time they said that was okay because it was an emergency. But Steve, if it's such an emergency, why then does this budget contain what we know as Christmas tree items, otherwise known as pork, where individual members' pet projects are put in this budget to the tunes of millions? Doesn't that give credence to the Republican senators who say we can't give federal money to states that can't control their spending?
You know, Raph, there's an old expression that you know as a great journalist, you know, one man's pork or one man or woman's pork is another person's really important program. And what I mean by that is this: is there fat? Is there pork? Are there pet projects in this budget for Democratic legislators who supported it? Absolutely. But there's also in those items that were added to the budget by the legislature mostly, and to some extent by the governor, there are items, there are dollars that go directly to urban education. There are dollars that go directly to people that have mental illness, dollars that support those programs for people with mental illness. There are a whole range of important programs. And so the question is, it's like, how do you surgically find where the fat is and where it's really valuable? I got to tell you, I was struck by how many of those items were in there and what they added up to. And by the way, Graf, the governor signed the budget that the legislature gave to him with many of those items, not one line item veto. He didn't take one out, which tells me, Raph, there was an agreement made between the legislative leadership and the governor, like, we'll give you that millionaire's tax. Don't take anything out that we're putting in that budget.
But, you know, aside from the Christmas tree items, there's also a tax rebate that adds up to $500 million that will go into effect just before next year's election. Who does that tax rebate help? Who is it going to? And do you think it's a coincidence that it's going to be doled out just before the 21 elections?
Ralph, you laughed when you asked me that question because you know the answer to it. First of all, I'll answer the second part. No, it's not a coincidence. In my view, the idea that that a certain number of people, and there are two different levels for depending on how many dependents, how many children you have, up to $75,000, it's a certain amount of money, up to $150,000, it's another amount of money that's higher. But here's the thing. Anyone above that does not get anything. But there's going to be a check sent in the summer of 2021. There's an election for governor and the seats in the legislature in November of 2021. All I know is those checks are coming right at a critical time. And I also ask, can we really afford it if we're having a fiscal crisis? And by the way, why is the check coming next summer? And why was that not put in the budget in such a way where it would come immediately to families who are struggling right now? I haven't heard a legitimate answer to that.
So Steve, let's talk about the Millionaires Tax, which raises the rate for those earning from 1 million to 5 million, from 8.97 to 10.75. Those who are earning more than 5 million is already paying 10.75. Governor Murphy had wanted to impose this for a long time throughout his tenure. Steve Sweeney, the Senate president, has blocked it because he said it would be counterproductive to the state, and also that fiscal reforms have to precede it. Well, the fiscal reforms didn't precede it, but Steve Sweeney agreed to it. Why?
I asked the Senate president that in our program, State of Affairs, that people can watch on WNET and NJTV, and he said, look, I don't like it. I still don't support the Millionaires Tax in theory, but these are unprecedented times. It's an emergency. We need the revenue. It's close to $400 million that's it's projected to come in. By the way, that's if no millionaires leave the state and move to Florida.
Right.
Cross your fingers on that one. But here's the thing. The Senate president also argued that because of the rebate checks that we just talked about, they're calling it middle class relief, tax relief. He argued that that was the trade-off. Now, the Millionaires Tax will not pay for all of that, but it pays for some of it. So the Senate president made it clear that that was the compromise. And the Assembly Speaker, Craig Coughlin, who also has never been for the Millionaires Tax, went to Senate President Sweeney and said, look, we've stopped this long enough. This is an emergency. The governor has asked for this. Let's be supportive this time around, particularly if we get these tax rebates to people in the summer of 2021. That's my understanding of the deal, if you will, or the compromise that was made.
So are there any other political calculations behind Sweeney's acceptance of this?
So you really want to get out there on this, Raf? Let's try it. You ready?
Don't spend too much time.
Listen, here's what could happen. So say Joe Biden, I'm not sure when this will be seen, but say Joe Biden wins the election, Democratic administration. I don't know. It seems to me Phil Murphy, former ambassador to Germany, previous administration, Obama administration, he's very close to Joe Biden. So if Biden wins, I think that Governor Phil Murphy is a prime candidate to be asked to join that cabinet if that were to happen, and with a Biden administration. If that happens, who's the next person in line in New Jersey to become governor? The Senate President, Steve Sweeney. I'm just saying that's the law. That's the Constitution of 1947. It may or may not have anything to do with what we're talking about, Raf, in terms of an agreement between the governor and Senate President. I'm just saying.
It's interesting to ponder. So you touched on this. What will the likely effects of this millionaire tax be on New Jersey's economy? Will businesses and rich individuals leave, especially since, for example, New York is not raising its taxes for the time being anyway?
Yeah, so when I asked Governor Murphy about that in our upcoming interview, he said, you know, Steve, the problem is not millionaires leaving the state to move to Florida or other states. The problem is middle-class people who can't afford to live in the state, which is why he argued you need to raise the millionaires tax to bring in that revenue to offset the pressure on middle-class families. But anecdotally, Raf, there have been people who are pretty wealthy that I know who have said, I'm going to Florida and I'm going to live there. I believe the law, Raf, is 1 day more than half the number of days in a year. And then you are a legal Florida resident and you pay 0 in New Jersey income taxes. That's the fear. The Assembly Republican leader John Bramnick said to me recently, that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to lose more of those wealthy New Jerseyans. The governor's arguing it's not the case. We will not know until they stay or leave. But They leave, you don't get that revenue. That means the economics don't work out, but the governor's rolling the dice that they will.
Yeah. So Steve, besides the issue of borrowing and the income tax hike, the biggest criticism surrounding this budget has been the process by which it was put together. That it didn't bring in a lot of input from a diversity of people, and particularly at a time when diversity is sought in power decisions. This is particularly egregious. What do you say about that?
It's legitimate. Actually, it's interesting. If it were just Republicans, those who are not fans of Democratic Governor Phil Murphy, it would be one thing. And it still would be legitimate, by the way. They have a legitimate role to play in being a part of the discussion about the budget. No, they don't have the votes, I understand. But the reality is it's also progressive, leaning left groups like New Jersey Policy Perspective, whose executive director said recently, I may like some of the things in this budget, like the Millionaires Tax, but I mean, seriously, that secret, no transparency, virtually no public discussion, all of it because of COVID, all of it. This should have been a more transparent process. It probably would have played out the way it did anyway. The budget would have been struck the way it was, with the rebates, tax rebates, with the Millionaires Tax, with the $4.5 million billion-dollar borrowing. But there would have been more public criticism, questioning, and challenging. And my view, Raf, is government under glass. Open it up if you think you're doing the right thing. And in my view, my analysis tells me it wasn't as transparent as it should have been.
Essentially the decisions about what went into this budget was duking it out among Democrats. The Republicans railed against it. He even went to the courts about the borrowing, but they didn't have any power. Are they going to have any power to have any effect on future budgets anytime soon? We have
realistically,
a minute and 50
I'm sorry for interrupting, Raf. Realistically, no. And it's comparable as we speak in the fall of 2020, as we're doing this interview, to the Democrats who are complaining about President Trump and the Republicans in the Senate moving through a Supreme Court nominee very quickly. You can complain, and they should. You should ask questions, and they should. But they don't have, as we say in my old neighborhood in Newark growing up, they don't have the juice. And the Republicans do not have the juice in the State House to do anything about what Governor Murphy, the Senate President Steve Sweeney, and the Assembly Speaker Craig Coughlin, all Democrats, decided to do. Republicans just don't have it.
And probably won't have it anytime soon, you're saying?
Not with the redistricting, not with the way those districts are laid out, the 40 legislative districts, and not with the fact that New Jersey is a pretty blue state and Chris Christie, while he was a Republican governor, an anomaly, if you will. The Democrats are very strong in the state of New Jersey and will control the legislature and executive branch, in my view, for a long time.
All right, Steve. Well, we're going to have to end it there because we're out of time. Thanks so much for joining us once again. It's always great to talk to you, my brother.
It's even better to talk to you. Thanks, Raf.
Okay, man. Bye-bye.